Anime has a very long and interesting history. Anime is one of the oldest animation mediums out there. Before we discuss the history of anime, I want to talk about what led up to the creation of anime as we know it today. But before we do that, it would be awesome if you could leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out and it would let me know that you want to see more videos like this one. There are two mediums that are commonly considered to be the precursors to anime, and they are emakimono and kage. Emakimono is an illustrated horizontal narration system that uses painted hand scrolls. Emakimono is an art form that combines calligraphy and pictures and are painted, drawn, or stamped onto really long scrolls made of silk or paper that can easily be several meters long. The person will have to unwind the scroll a little at a time, revealing the story that is inside. Emakimono are a narrative genre similar to a book, telling romantic or epic stories or illustrating religious texts and legends. Today, emakimono offers an interesting and unique historical look into the life and customs of Japanese people. Kage is also known as shadow play or shadow puppetry, and it has a long history in many Southeast Asian countries. It's a form of entertainment that uses cutout figures or puppets and is held in a light source and a screen. This eventually evolved further, where eventually we started to see it be used as an animation medium known as the silhouette animation. This is a format where shadow play puppets are filmed frame by frame, similar to stop motion today. This technique is still used today in many different ways, like with stop motion animation, but the traditional way as well. Although cell and computer animation have started to imitate the look of shadow play and silhouette animation, you can really see how these two mediums would have influenced the creation of anime, especially as one of them evolved into its own form of animation. Although these influenced the creation of anime, ultimately anime made its start potentially as early as 1907 with the animated short known as Katsudo Shashin. There is a lot of evidence that suggests this is true based off how this film was found. Weirdly enough, it is widely contentious on when the first animated work was shown in Japan as well. We know that there has been no verifiable Japanese animation before the year of 1916, however, the possibility does exist that there is a whole bunch of animated works that came to Japan. However, even then, there is no proof that there was ever any shown publicly before the year of 1912. There have been a lot of stuff to come out over the years, but none have been proven to come out before 1912, however, Katsudo Shashin is likely to come out in 1907. The first piece of animation to come from outside of Japan was in 1910. We don't really have any proof that this was ever shown publicly, however. In 1914, US and European animation was introduced to Japan, which later ended up inspiring Junichi Kochi and Satoru Kitayama, who are widely considered to be the fathers of anime. There aren't many complete animated works from the beginning of Japanese animation that have survived. There are a bunch of different reasons for this, but a big one is that most of them were of commercial use, which meant after they had been run, they were sold to smaller theaters across Japan and disassembled, or they were sold as strips or single frames. The earliest known anime to have survived to the modern day is a short called Namakura-gatana, or the English title, The Dull Sword, which was made on June 30th, 1917. This short is about a stupid samurai who buys a completely dull sword and wonders why it won't cut anyone, so he tries to attack random citizens who defend themselves as they knock him out. I've actually seen this short, and even though there's no sound and I can hardly read Japanese, it is still pretty fun to watch. There are 3 people who are credited for making the first animated short in Japan, 2 of which I've already mentioned earlier, Junichi Kochi and Satoru Kitayama. However, there is a third person who should get some credit for his work, and his name is Oten Shimokawa. All 3 of these men made what was considered to be the first animated shorts, with Junichi Kochi making the aforementioned Namakura-gatana short. Satoru Kitayama was an animator that went on to found his own studio instead of working for some big company. And Oten Shimokawa was hired by the company Tenkatsu to make animated shorts, one of which is known as the story of the concierge Mukuzo Imakawa, or in Japanese, Imakawa Mukuzo Genkenben no Maki. However, sadly, most of these works were destroyed after a massive earthquake that struck Japan in 1923. The era of pre-war anime started to take shape after the earthquake in 1923. A lot of the animators of this era were students of some of the animators of the 1910s. Kenzo Masuoka was an important animator who worked at a smaller animation studio. He wasn't a student of any of the previously mentioned animators, however he was influential for a bunch of reasons, and he would later be one of the founders of what would later become Toei Animation. Most of the early Japanese animated works were lost after the aforementioned earthquake in 1923, which also destroyed most of the Kitayama studio, which was the studio Satoru Kitayama founded. Pre-war animators faced a lot of difficulties. First, they had to compete with foreign companies like Disney, which had a massive influence on both audiences and producers. Foreign animation had already made a profit abroad, which meant they could charge a lot less for their works, which made it a lot harder for Japanese producers to break even, let alone make a profit. Therefore, Japanese animators had to work with a lot less money in smaller companies and with way smaller teams, which also made it extremely difficult to compete in terms of quality with most foreign animations that had color and sound and were promoted by much larger companies. It took until the mid-1930s for them to finally start using cell animation instead of cutout animation, which they used because cell animation was too expensive. Them using cutout animation resulted in animation that could seem very unoriginal and flat. Animators such as Kenzo Masuoka, who I mentioned earlier, did attempt to take Japanese animation up to where foreign animation was by introducing cell animation, sound like voice acting, and technology to their works. Masaoka created the first anime with voice acting, Chikara Taona no Yo no Naka, which came out in 1933, but sadly it is lost to time. However, the first anime made entirely using cell animation, The Dance of the Chagamas or Chagama Ondo, is still available to watch in its entirety on YouTube. A lot of these innovations were extremely difficult to support commercially, so a lot of animators depended greatly on sponsorships, and because of this, animators were often making PR films, educational films, and eventually they would also end up making works of propaganda for the military. During this time, heavy censorship and school regulations stopped a lot of children from watching these anime, so anime that had any educational value was supported and encouraged by the Mambusho or the Ministry of Education. This was very important for producers that had experienced difficulty releasing their animation in regular theaters. Animation had finally found its way into many different places, from schools to industries to even the government and military, and it was not going anywhere. In the 1930s, the Japanese government really started to enforce cultural nationalism, which led to strict censorship and control over all published media. So of course, because of this, animators were encouraged to make anime that promoted Japanese nationalism. The support of the Japanese government helped to boost the industry, as bigger companies started to form through different mergers, which then prompted major live-action studios to begin producing animation. But then, wartime reorganization of the industry merged all the film studios into 3 big companies. During World War II, just like Western animation at the time, anime was ordered by the military to release a bunch of propaganda films showing off the strength of the Japanese military. In the years following World War II, Japanese media was often influenced by the US of A. During this time, foreign films began influencing people such as the legend himself, Osamu Tezuka. In the 1950s, anime studios began appearing across Japan. Toei Animation also appeared at this time under the name of Toei Doga. However, for the Japanese public, it wasn't until the release of Panda of the Magic Serpent in October of 1958 that Japan fully entered the world of professional animation, as it was the first colored anime. During this time, animators were experimenting with their own styles using Western techniques. Osamu Tezuka also started drawing shonen manga like Astro Boy and Rob no Kishi. The latter would later become Princess Knight, trying to appeal to female readers while also pioneering shoujo manga. The 1960s brought about the start of the traditional anime style that we know today. The first anime to be broadcast on TV was the anime known as Mitsu no Hunashi, or Three Tales, on January 15, 1960. And later, in 1961, we saw the first anime television series called Instant History. However, it is sometimes known as a Togi's manga calendar, and it didn't consist entirely of animation. The series Astro Boy came out in 1963, and it was the first anime series to become widely popular even outside of Japan, and it is widely considered to be the start of the shonen demographic of anime and manga in Japan. The 1960s brought even more now famous and classic anime like Wolf Boy Ken, which is Toei Animation's first ever series, as well as Kimba the White Lion, a series considered to be very similar to the Lion King movie later made by Disney, as well as the first magical girl anime Sally the Witch. The first shoujo anime, Princess Knight, also by Osamu Tezuka, came out during this decade. The original Speed Racer also came out during this time, with great success in both Japan and in the West, which later brought about many continuations and reboots. The 1960s saw anime take off as studios saw it as a commercial success, making anime a mainstay in Japanese culture today. The 1970s was a rough time for the Japanese anime market, with more competition from television starting. This meant that Toei and other companies had to start downsizing, and many of its animators went on to be in different companies. Mushi Production also went bankrupt at this time, although they later made a comeback. A lot of Mushi Production staff went on to found now famous anime studios Madhouse and Sunrise. Because of this rough time, many young animators were forced to become directors, but this allowed for a lot of experimentation with the anime coming out, with series like Ashita no Joe and Lupin III becoming huge successes. During the 1970s, anime reached Europe with many anime aimed at Japanese and European children. Italy, Spain, and France grew an interest in Japanese animation, which was offered at a way lower price than the locally made stuff. The genre of mecha started to be made for the first time during this period. Some of the earliest mecha series were Mazinger Z, Space Battleship Yamato, and was probably the most famous mecha anime series, Mobile Suit Gundam. Shows targeted towards a more female audience started to gain a massive amount of popularity as well, with shows like Candy Candy and The Rose of Versailles. In the 1980s, anime started to have a massive increase in quality thanks to the newer anime directors like Hayao Miyazaki, Isao Takahata, and Katsuhiro Otomo. Anime started to have more complex and interesting stories to tell. There was a massive shift towards space operas thanks to the commercial success of Star Wars. This allowed for series like Space Battleship Yamato and Mobile Suit Gundam to be successfully revived in theatrical films. The success of those two movies is seen as the beginning of the anime boom of the 1980s. The subculture of what is now known as otaku first started to appear at this time with the help of a few magazines like Animage and New Type. There were a lot of big anime that came out during this time, like the Macross series or some of the many Gundam sequels, and what I would argue is still one of the biggest anime series from that era that even recently got remastered, Urusei Yatsura, by Rumiko Takahashi. This series changed the game and allowed Rumiko Takahashi to become a household name in the shonen manga industry, where she would later go on to write an even more famous manga and anime, Inuyasha. Thanks to the otaku subculture in Japan, many people entering the industry at the time were massively influenced by what was around them. The amateur group Daikon Films, which would later become Gainax, was one of the groups of these people. Thanks to the success of the famous film Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, more experimental and ambitious anime films were allowed to be made. It also allowed for Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata to create their own studio. This studio would become what is now known as Studio Ghibli. The success of Dragon Ball introduced the martial arts genre to anime and became an incredibly influential series. It influenced a whole bunch of incredible martial arts anime and manga series, including the GOAT Hajime no Ippo, and even later than that, Naruto. The 1980s also introduced anime to the home video market in the form of OVAs, or original video animations. OVAs opened up the floodgates, introducing viewers, especially those to the West, to anime. The first OVA was Mamoru Oshii's Dallos, which was a 4-episode OVA released from the end of 1983 to the midway through 1984. OVAs allowed for the release of pornographic anime such as Cream Lemon, which I am down and bad enough to have actually seen. The first hentai OVA was an anime called Lolita Anime, which I have not seen, but it was released in 1984. The 1980s saw the release of the first ever sports anime based off the famous soccer manga Captain Tsubasa, which became the first worldwide successful sports anime. The themes and stories were eventually made into a formula that would be used by many different sports series that followed. The mid to late 1980s saw a bunch of high budget and experimental films coming out. A lot of these films became way more ambitious, each film trying to outclass and outspend its predecessors. Some of these films would include Tale of Genji and Grave of the Fireflies, which were both very ambitious films based on important literary works in Japan. This period of high-budgeted and experimental films would reach its peak with the two most expensive anime films ever, Royal Space Force, The Wings of Harmonies, and Akira. Studio Ghibli would also have another hit with their film Kiki's Delivery Service, which would be the top-grossing film for 1989, earning over $40 million at the box office. Akira actually failed in Japan, but it ended up having a much larger fan base in the West. The film eventually became a symbol for the medium of anime in the West. The 1980s era of anime would end with the godfather of manga, Osamu Tezuka's death in 1989. The early 90s brought about a few of what is now considered some classic anime, like Sailor Moon, Yu Yu Hakusho, and Slam Dunk. Each one of these series ended up becoming some of the biggest anime of all time and are still talked about to this day. In 1995, Hideaki Anno would release the now famous Neon Genesis Evangelion. This series caused TV Tokyo to increase the censorship of anime, which resulted in series like Cowboy Bebop being heavily censored and only airing half of its episodes on TV. Evangelion started a series of what is now considered a lot of organic or post-Evangelion mecha shows. Most of these mecha anime have some kind of religious or complex plot. There were a lot of experimental anime released in the 90s, one of the most notable being Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell, alongside Evangelion and Cowboy Bebop, helped to further increase the awareness of anime in the West. Satoshi Kon released his first ever full feature-length film Perfect Blue in 1997. This film covered a lot of heavy themes that take place in the entertainment industry. Many people still consider this film to be a masterpiece. The mecha genre would start to decline in the mid to late 90s, and it wasn't until the mid 2000s when the mecha genre would start to become popular again with series like Gundam Seed and a few others. There were over 100 anime that aired on TV in Japan in 1998, including some popular series like Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z. However, the biggest success would come out 1 year later in 1999 called One Piece, better known as Goat Piece, which is based off the best-selling manga of the same name, which is still ongoing to this day with the ending finally being in sight. The number of anime being produced began to decline after 2006 due to other forms of entertainment, less ad revenue, and other reasons, with TV Tokyo remaining one of the only channels still airing anime. Despite that, anime began entering the West like never before, with fans being able to get a hold of so many different types of anime thanks to the internet. The anime trend of experimental and late-night anime that was popularized by the series Serial Experiments Lain in the late 90s also continued into the 2000s, with anime such as Boogie Pop Phantom, Elfen Lied, and Paranoia Agent being among some of them. With this trend, we started to see a lot of series push the boundaries of violence, nudity, and story themes. They would also use a lot of unique and artistic elements in this series, which ended up making them a lot more interesting to look back on. Before the massive anime boom from companies like Crunchyroll and Funimation, viewing anime in the West was extremely difficult. Since the interest in the West was quite low, many companies decided to not bother airing anime. This was due to a bunch of different factors, one of which is getting the show translated. In this day and age, it would be almost impossible to find an anime that doesn't eventually get a dub of some kind. However, in the early 90s, when anime was first starting to become big, that was not always the case. A lot of these people would translate the show themselves and post them online for others to watch. This would continue throughout the 2000s, however, it would slow down when the show Cowboy Bebop first started airing on TV. It was the first anime to be broadcast live on television in the West. The anime was an instant success. There was one problem, and that was that the anime aired late at night, meaning that the audience only had a small pool of people to choose from for the audience. Alongside all of this, the 2000s also had an increase in the moe art style and the bishojo and bishonen character designs. There was also an increase in popularity of genres like romance, harem, and slice of life. The 2000s saw an increase in the amount of anime based on eroge and visual novels. That was actually a building trend that started in the late 90s by series like Sentimental Journey and Two Heart. However, this trend would continue with series like Shuffle, Canon, Fate Stay Night, Higurashi, and the greatest anime of all time, Clannad and Clannad After Story. There have also been a lot of series adapted from manga and light novels, including some really popular ones like Monster, Naruto, Toradora, and Bakemonogatari. These anime would typically last over the course of a bunch of different years and achieve huge fan bases, however, not always. And during this time, original anime would also continue to be produced with the same level of success. Out of these adaptations, 3 would go on to dominate the industry for an entire decade, later being known as the Big 3. Those series, of course, being the aforementioned Naruto, One Piece, and Bleach. The decade saw a massive revival of high-budget feature-length anime films, such as Millennium Actress, Paprika, and the most expensive film at the time, Steam Boy, which cost $26 million to produce. Satoshi Kon would go on to establish himself alongside other directors like Otomo and Oshii as one of the biggest anime directors, before his death at the age of 46. There were some other younger people like Mamoru Hosoda who would go on to direct incredible films like The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and Summer Wars. The 2000s saw anime films for the first time be nominated for many international awards, like Spirited Away, which in 2003 won an Academy Award for the Best Animated Feature. It was the first non-American film to do so. It was also the highest grossing anime film for quite some time before the 2020 movie Demon Slayer Mugen Train came out and overtook it. After the launch of Toonami in March 1997, anime saw a giant rise in the North American market. Anime targeting kids like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Digimon, Beyblade, and the 4Kids adaptation of One Piece all received different levels of success. We also saw a massive rise of cartoons that were inspired by anime, shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender and its sequel The Legend of Korra, Ben 10, The Boondocks, Ruby, and Teen Titans. And because of this, anime started to become a household name in the US. 2006 would be the launch of Crunchyroll, being the first anime streaming service. In 2011, Puella Magi Madoka Magica was aired in Japan. The anime changed how magical girl anime was seen, as this anime contained darker and more complex themes than magical girl animes would usually have. And since this has come out, we have seen many anime try to replicate the formula with varying levels of success. 2012 saw the release of one of the most influential anime of the 2010s, although not everyone wants to admit that, and that anime is Sword Art Online. Although it's not the first isekai, it is the series that brought the isekai genre into prominence, making it a mainstay genre of anime that we still see releases of to this day. Of course, the genre is very controversial, but there have been many successful anime to release from the isekai genre, like ReZero or That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. The 2010s was also the end of an era of anime, with 2 of the 3 biggest anime coming to an end in Naruto and Bleach. These anime alongside One Piece dominated the 2000s and brought many kids growing up during that time a lot of entertainment for basically the entirety of their childhoods and into their adult lives. These series, now known as the Big 3, would officially come to an end with the final episode of Naruto airing on October 23, 2016, although it would still go on to adapt some of his novels for a few more months, officially ending on March of 2017. However, despite the Big 3 era coming to an end, we saw the rise of many other popular anime that have reached the heights that anime fans never could have dreamed of. With series like Attack on Titan literally breaking the website it strains on every time a new episode releases because of the sheer amount of people trying to watch the anime. However, Attack on Titan isn't the only anime to rise to prominence in this decade. We also have had series like My Hero Academia and Black Clover, 2 series that would become massive mainstay series in the absence of Naruto and Bleach. A lot of streaming services such as Netflix are becoming increasingly more involved in the production and licensing of anime for the international market. Although the 2020s have just started, the history of this decade is already being formed with many popular anime coming out in this decade or gaining popularity for the first time. Series like Demon Slayer or Jujutsu Kaisen have taken over the world with everybody and their mom watching these series. Attack on Titan has reached heights that have never been seen before from an anime. And somehow, even series like My Dress Up Darling and Spy Family, series with a more wholesome vibe, are becoming insanely popular for the first time. 2020s brought back the Big 3 era, with Boruto aka Naruto and the Bleach 1000 Year Blood War anime airing, making this the first time in over a decade that all 3 series were airing at the same time. The 2020s so far have been an interesting decade for anime, and I'm looking forward to seeing what is in store for us in the future. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I worked really hard on this video over the course of a whole month. Firstly, I want to say publicly in a video, thank you so much for 500 subscribers. It means the world to me. I know 500 doesn't seem like a lot to some people, but I never dreamed I would make it this far when I started up YouTube again in 2020. I thought, like all my previous attempts, that I would reach like maybe 20 people, so the fact that over 500 of you subscribed makes me ecstatic, and even if no one ever subscribes again, I will continue making videos because it is something I love doing, and I hope you will all continue to support me into the future. Secondly, I want to say that this is the first of a series of videos I'm going to make where I research a topic related to anime and make a long detailed video about it. This is something I've wanted to do for a while but never really found the time to until recently. I'm going to call this series the Anime Encyclopedia. Of course, you can watch these videos in any order you want. I just want more people to know about anime, and not in a biased review sense like I normally do, but in a more analytical sense. I hope everyone checks this series out because I have so many awesome videos I can make on this, and I am really looking forward to making more. Thank you so much again for the support, and I hope to see you next week with another video. Bye bye.